Well, first, I'd like to thank everyone for attending this session. Now, looking at the title of the session, Can Schools Fix Broken Britain? I look here a little bit differently. I think that many of our schools are themselves broken. So the idea that these institutions would fix broken Britain is somewhat suspect to me. So, and also looking at the current Labour government, the Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson talked about launching a review of the curriculum in primary and secondary schools, talking about embedding critical skills which will equip students to tackle fake news, disinformation, and putrid conspiracy theories. But I would argue that many members of the Labour government need exactly that kind of course. So I think that one of the main issues for me, and this is probably one of the main topics of the session, is what are schools there for? What are their responsibilities? What are their duties? And I think that there are far too many people in the educational profession, in the education system, who have forgotten about their bread and butter responsibilities and duties. I think that there is far too much political activism in our school system. Now, of course, schools can play a role in addressing community cohesion issues, encouraging intercultural knowledge exchange. But I think that all too often that has moved into various forms of tribal political instruction. And that can be deeply confusing and has actually created a more fragmented school system, especially in terms of the messaging that is provided on matters of cohesion and solidarity. The Chartered College of Teaching has pointed out that schools shouldn't be expected to solve all the problems in society. I'm not sure anyone's ever really asked schools to do that, but they would also expect that schools don't add to existing problems in society. That is also very important. And I think that what we've seen in recent times is schools just coming across as quite confused in terms of handling various political and social issues. I'll give you one example. There's been a great deal of fundraising activities in the school system associated with the Russia-Ukraine conflict, fundraising for Ukrainian causes. But there's been a certain hostility and skepticism when those very same activities have been carried out in line with the Palestinian cause. And that is the issue, really, that there is increasingly confused dynamics in terms of how schools approach, in my view, quite complex geopolitical issues. Now, of course, schools should provide a forum in terms of exchanging cultural ideas and also facilitating various forms of mutual understanding. But there is also the risk that it could create more tensions by doing that. So in my view, schools, in terms of what they should be promoting, is what are the rights that people have, their opportunities, their freedoms, what protections exist in modern Britain. I certainly think in terms of politics, there's absolutely no harm in terms of talking about people's potential for civic engagement, how they can participate in democracy. But I think that if you start moving into what I'd consider to be quite contentious issues, I think you could create a great deal of problems in the school system. Now, just to make this point on British values, I grew up hearing that phrase so many times. People who don't know that I've lived my entire life in my hometown of Luton, which is incredibly diverse in ethnically, racially, and religiously. And I think that if you were to ask 5 people, what do British values mean to you, you might get 5 very different answers. Now, I think schools have a role to play in saying, this is what the UK government has stated are British values, those terms such as respect for the rule of law, mutual tolerance. But I think also the issue is that many people will have different definitions of even what tolerance constitutes. I think that there's definitely a message to be promoted in terms of treating people with dignity, with a basic level of respect. But I think that ultimately the bread and butter of schools is preparing pupils and equipping them with the skills to cope in a very competitive market environment. I think that is the key. I think that if you look at international league tables, I think the UK overall could be doing a lot better, especially in terms of numeracy skills and mathematical capabilities. And I think that there's been far too much emphasis in terms of talking about anti-racism training, being a fine example, how do you bolster social cohesion? When I think that first and foremost, we need to get many of our schools in order in terms of equipping young people with the skills they need, not just to compete in the domestic market environment, but increasingly globalized world economy. So I think in this, it's something that Toby talked about ahead of this event and also here at the beginning of it. People have very different perceptions on matters of immigration. Some people think that two-tier policing is a reality. Other people consider it to be a far-right conspiracy theory. And I think that trying to manage these dynamics in schools can be hugely problematic. So I think that the new government needs to very much stick with the bread and butter of what schools should be, what they should encourage. And I think that there's something to be said about schools encouraging people to participate in democratic processes, what their rights are, what the protections they have, and ultimately the kind of freedoms and opportunities which are offered in modern Britain. But I think that if it starts moving towards various forms of tribal political instruction, then schools could actually lead to the fostering of an environment which could be even more divisive. And I don't think that's anything that anyone truly wants. And I'll just leave that there.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Rakib.